Hi, welcome to making a seascape painting with me, Jon Bandish, the Jimmy Buffett of Seascapes, self-proclaimed. So, if you've met me before, seen me at an outdoor art show, seen me at a gallery, and a museum show, wherever you saw me, you saw my work, you can definitely see that I'm a bit different than a lot of other contemporary painters and seascape painters. Now, one of the things that makes me different, as I talk about, is the drawing. The drawing is everything. I often use the analogy that a drawing is the foundation for a painting, much the same way a foundation is for your home. If the foundation is not level and plumb and set correctly, everything that gets built on top is going to be off, and it will be a struggle all the way through. So a painting should, and realistically should, be the same struggles, right? And I see people accepting those struggles as being part of the fun, and I would agree that, there's something fun about that. And I'm not here to say that direct painting and indirect painting are at odds with one another. I'm actually working on a painting right now that is more of a direct painting, challenging my own ideas about how to create a painting. What does that mean, right? I think that doing this, though, lets you work out compositional issues more than anything. Now, part of that is because I do tend to paint in thinner layers, right? The more thickly you paint, right, anything you do on top is going to have that as an influence, right? That impasto, whether it's with acrylic, whether it's with even gouache, in some ways can be a little bit thicker, and especially oil. The more thickly you paint, the more that you got to deal with that. Now, sometimes that's not an issue, but for me at least, I find that to be problematic, and that's something else that we can get into as we're in the painting stage layers later on. But back to the drawing part of it, having a good solid foundation, at least compositionally, lets you alleviate some of those issues that you would later get into, where you could say, I wish I had figured that out before. Now, in some ways, you can't avoid certain things. Once you start laying colors down, things start happening, right? So you can plan all you want, and that's really what this stage layer is. It's planning. And if you haven't met me before and you haven't come across this, and you're saying, well, why are you doing that? Why are you starting a seascape that way? It almost seems counterintuitive. Water by nature is flowing. It may be a solid, it is viscous, so it does have a form to it, but it is constantly moving. When I would say, yes, you're correct. Now, this is what makes me a bit different. You can see in the background some works that I have right there, right there, right there. I started off as a figurative painter. I still love the figure. I have, well, probably always have a love affair with that, right? I just love the water a little bit more. I don't know what to tell you. I love it. Anyways, so using some of those techniques from, we'll just use the term classical figure painting, right? Where you made a very worked, detailed drawing. Anatomically, everything about the figure was correct. I found that part of that process to be really fulfilling for me. I knew that I didn't have to worry about a forearm being anatomically incorrect as far as in a proportion or in a relation to another part of the body. All of that had been worked out. And when I started employing that with the seascapes, I started realizing that it was immensely satisfying to me, because I wanted the seascapes to be a certain way. I wanted them to have a realism, and I wasn't working that way. They were all really fun, really colorful, very thick and impasto, and I was enjoying it, and I still enjoy that. But this is something that really, really resonated with what I wanted. So I will say that I would experiment. I would recommend experimenting with this. It's called indirect painting. You're starting with a detailed drawing and then working thin layers of color over top of one another, at various layers of opacity or transparency, to then build a painting surface. So everything is very intentional. That works for me, and especially for what I'm interested in. You can see some of even the more traditional seascapes where I'm focused in on that milieu of detail of what I see when I'm looking out at the water. The body of work that I do a lot of, that water's edge, those areas where the sand and the sea meet, so to speak, is what I'm interested in. So in order to employ a lot of those details, you do have to be intentional. That being said, we're going to walk through how I do that. Now, I will say this. I'm never beholden to any reference images. I take my own reference images because I have my own thoughts and ideas. A little bit lucky in that respect because I live by the beach. I'm about 10 minutes from Bethany Beach, about 30 minutes away from Rehoboth Beach down here in Delaware, and I can get to all the other beaches on the Eastern Shore. So being a Seascape painter, that's why I moved here. If you're interested in seascapes and you don't live there, you are kind of beholden to using images of somebody else. That being said, I'm never fully beholden to that. Now, being more interested in realism, you would think, well, wouldn't you be tied to those reference images? And as you'll see in just a second, I don't usually use just one reference. A lot of times I'm looking at things compositionally saying, what would happen if I mixed this part of the wave, that part of the wave, this part of this, that part of that? Compositionally, what does that mean? Because ultimately, as much as I may be a realist, I'm more interested in color and shape than I am in something that's more rooted in something more traditional in that respect. I'm kind of in like a weird spot where I like a lot of different things. So what I'm going to do is turn the camera around and I'm going to show you two images that I took a couple of years ago in Naples, Florida. And they are the starting point for making a drawing. So let's take a look. Whoop. All right, so here's my laptop. Here are the two images. So I'm going to use a pencil here, straight number 2, whittled all the way down because I draw a ton. So what I'm thinking of is I really like this part of this, and you can kind of see there's this fun little S curve in here, which I have an idea of wanting to have a little bit of a waveform coming this way. It's kind of hard to tell how small this image is, and I don't know how the laptop screen works with the phone screen, but this shape as like a wave cresting in the foreground is something that I've employed a fair amount, and I like having a background wave, and this kind of works because this form marries that form and marries that form. I'm not going to include a horizon line on my canvas. I'm actually going to turn this so it's a vertical surface. But what I really like about this reference image is this line and this little bit of light edge, and then this in here. I've employed a lot of that as a compositional device before, and I might even include a little bit of this here because this is a really great edge here that would then mimic some of this here. And then I think I like in here a little better than I like here. By the way, like if you can't tell, this was taken from the same time of me in the water, that very same photo shoot, just a little bit of clicks away. This was image 9351, this is image 9366. So they're really close together, but it doesn't mean that you have to do that. A lot of times I'll take reference images, I'll know something in the back of my mind somehow of the thousands of images that I have on portable hard drives of, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. So let's just start this. The drawing is the drawing. There's a lot of different ways that you can incorporate making a drawing, but this is sort of the start. So let's turn the camera this away. And here is a 16 by 20. This is my my demo, if you will. And as I'm looking at these two images, I know that I'm going to omit the horizon line. I almost never put the horizon line in. So in looking at this long, tall vertical, which is very similar to this, I can kind of understand that compositionally, I want this wave to be somewhere in here. So you could use vine charcoal or something like that, or a pencil with a little less graphite, if you will, and that would be fine. I wouldn't necessarily say you have to or not have to do something like that, but right here, all you're trying to do is kind of just block in very roughly where you want some of these shapes to be at. And what's great about this is no matter what determination that you make with a pencil, this is incredibly easier to move and refine than it is with paint. Once you start putting paint down, you start trying to change things, it gets to be a little bit on the muddier side. So this is representing here. This top line here is representing this top line on this wave here. I know you can't quite see all of this. We're beholden to how this sort of all works together. I guess I could try to move this a little bit closer. You can't still quite see all of it in the same shot. I'd rather you be able to see at least a little bit of what I'm doing, and I know it's really difficult to see this mark right now that I'm making, and those marks will get to be a little bit more refined sooner than later, but for all intent purposes now. Okay, so overall this shape kind of like dips into this way. I'm keeping it light, right? Just like you would in any other drawing scenario where you want to keep things a little bit easier to erase and move as you're working. I actually really like that. I think I'm going to incorporate that into the shape somehow because it's a very similar sort of oval-esque type of shape, and that could be really nice. So I can actually pull this down here and have a little bit of that repetition. So I'm talking about this, in this image, there's a really nice oval shape here. And in this image, there's a really nice oval shape here in the negative space. So those can kind of mirror themselves just that little bit. And I think that is what I'm going to do. Keeping everything really simple like this now allows you to say, we're going to have a little bit of artistic license and make this shape a little bigger, a little this, a little that. In the past, I have found myself being a little more tied in a rigid sense to, well, this is what the reference images looks like, so this is what I want to do. And I'm not here to tell you that I think that it's entirely good or entirely bad to do that. I think anything that you do has a merit and a value within the context of whatever you're doing. That being said, I think maybe in the beginning stages, it's important to try to be a little bit more accurate to whatever the subject matter of a thing is in order to be able to, if your interest is in realism, kind of in any way, your interest should be based, if it's based in realism, then your outcome should be, at least in some part, based on that. Therefore, I would suggest, it's actually really interesting. I see some of those then mirrored up here a little further up in the picture plane. I want to make sure I get those kind of put in. What you'll find a lot of times is that if you're doing seascapes and you're doing this type of work, you'll find that nature repeats itself regardless of whatever the thing is. But in the context of seascapes, it's definitely, the shapes are almost the same every single time. It's just a matter of well, there's some variables that play with how rough the water is. If it's a more calm seas, then obviously you're not going to get as much. Right now, I'm just being really, really loose with this drawing. And eventually, you'll start to refine, and you'll start to do this, and you'll start to do that. I truly think, let's see, that's to this. So this goes up just a little bit more into here. It's a little further up. I kind of like that. And as I'm up here, I know that I want to have a little bit more of these types of shapes of the water. What's interesting is how similar a seascape can be to a mountainscape. And oftentimes, some of these more abstracted seascapes where things are a little more close up, if you will, people will often say something like, oh, wow, looks like a mountain. It's really interesting. You have to take some of that and kind of own it, because if the shapes or the forms do have a similarity to it, that's just what the person's seeing. It's, it's honest. I'm having a little bit of fun with some of these little sort of driplets. And again, I don't know what's showing up on the screen right now at the moment. I'm about just shy of 15 minutes in. I'm going to cap this part of the drawing at 15 minutes. Well, I guess I could keep going. I've sort of thought about how I want to, what are the sort of parameters, if you will, for for how I want to actually go about how much of my secrets, how much of everything do I want to give. You know, what kind of secrets do I want to keep for myself? That's funny because I'm not really secretive. I have no problems at shows talking to people about things, but now here I am making my first videos, right? I'm not trying to monetize these per se. Part of this is just to build a YouTube channel. Maybe one day we'll think about monetizing, but I think it's more for explaining the process. I'm making these videos and I'm going to edit down all of this to a really quick couple of minute little things where I can have. So, all right, we're going to cap this at 16 minutes, and that's 4, 3, 2, 1. So keep coming back and looking through. We'll be back.